This episode is brought to you by Affinity, the most trusted CRM for private capital.
So Anthony, you know how we are just in a time loop and all that is presented new is really just what was presented in the 2010s.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking specifically about Google Glass, about Sergey Brin, who was at Google I/O saying, made some mistakes with Google Glass, but it's coming back. It's going to happen this time.
Yeah, it's going to happen. And so Google I/O, which we are going to talk about later, but they have this Android XR smart glasses. And as they were announcing all of these different features, I just kept going, isn't that what Google Glass was doing in 2013, 2014? Did you ever get a pair?
I never owned a pair. I've definitely tried them out. Actually, Drew Olenoff, who is a longtime sort of, boomerang at TechCrunch. I think he was actually working at TechCrunch at the time. He even filmed a little video of himself with Google Glass that then made it onto the Conan O'Brien show. So it was it had a moment 12-ish, 11, 12 years ago, but it was also just deeply mockable. I was going to say unpopular, which it was, but it was also just that if you wore them, people made fun of you. That was the big thing.
Well, before we get too deep into Google Glass 2.0, welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, May 23rd. I'm Kirsten Korosek, transportation editor.
And I'm Anthony Ha, weekend editor.
On the show today, we have deals of the week on 23andMe. Does it have a second life? And Jony Ive and OpenAI, cannot wait to talk about that one. And then we're going to bring Max back on the show to talk about his time at Google I/O and drama at Luminar. Let's get into this 23andMe deal, which is an acquisition. It's a second life. I don't know. I don't know if you think of it as a second life. I sort of do.
Well, it is a second life, but in the sense that, it was definitely not looking good, right? This is a company that was filed for bankruptcy protection. I think there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen, particularly to the customer's data. And so now there's a, pharmaceutical company, Regeneron. I don't know a ton about them, but they acquired 23andMe. And they've said they're going to use the data for drug discovery. But I think probably the bigger question for a lot of people was what's going to happen with the data? And they said, we're going to sort of abide by 23andMe's existing privacy policies, which I guess is good news. But I will say that, for a long time, a lot of people I knew were doing 23andMe testing. I was always a little hesitant. And I thought maybe I was being a little paranoid. But now I feel very justified that, again, this is not to say anything sinister about Regeneron, but just I don't think there's any sort of legal constraint that's going to force them to use the data in the way that the customers maybe want.
That name is actually perfectly evil, villainous name though, by the way. But putting that aside, that's just my personal opinion. I think you're right on the customer data. So what to me was really interesting is 23andMe went through bankruptcy protection in March, and a lot of attention was placed on the company because of this data breach that exposed private and genetic data of something I think 7 million customers through 2023. And the company at that time, I kind of wanted to know what was going to happen with all this data. And then here we are back now with this acquisition. To your point, what do they do with the data now? And then what are the security protocols that they're going to do to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah. And I mean, is this something where essentially they're really treating this as hey, this is just a new data set that we're buying? I mean, they say they're going to continue the genomic service. And so in theory, you should still be able to go sign up for 23andMe and get tested. Now that they're owned by, again, not saying anything about the company itself, but a company with a very sinister sounding name, Regeneron, I would say that the ability of 23andMe to sign up new customers is down considerably. I mean, I think, again, the breach probably dealt a pretty fatal blow to that business anyway, but I don't imagine that their genomics business is going to be growing particularly quickly.
Although people do have short memories, I will say this, and a rebranding, maybe even taking away the 23andMe name, rebranding, rebooting it as something else, I could see people then completely forgetting that what the root of that acquisition was and signing up for, genetic testing. So TBD on that one. I want to really talk about this other incredible deal. I think it might actually be the biggest deal of the year in terms of size of deal and its potential for memes. And I'm talking about the Jony Ive, Sam Altman, OpenAI mashup.
Yeah.
And this is just incredible to me.
Well, so you mentioned the size. So it's a $6.5 billion acquisition of Jony Ive's company, IO, I think is how you pronounce it.
Yeah.
If there's anything that would compete with a deal of that size, it would just be another OpenAI funding round or something.
Fair.
But I lose track of when OpenAI raised its giant mega round. So yeah, it's certainly one of the biggest deals of the year. And it's supposed to be something where the crux of it is that Jony Ive and his team are going to be helping OpenAI build a Gen AI hardware device. And they're saying almost nothing else about it except basically the things that it's not, right? It's not going to be glasses. Sounds like he's kind of suspicious. He being Jony Ive is sort of suspicious of wearables in general. So it's really not clear what this is going to be, but it's probably not going to look like Google Glass, for example.
Yeah, you know what image just popped in my head is I was like, well, what could be something that wouldn't be wearable, but that you could have in your pocket and you could interact with it? And so I was like, well, a phone, right? And I'm like, oh, are they going to bring back some sort of iPod Nano style device? We will see what they do, but I would like to point out that do we want to be carrying around a whole nother thing? And is it meant to replace the phone? And so I think that is a key question around any kind of hardware that supports AI. Is this a step change where we're just ditching our phone altogether and then we just have our little AI agents traveling around with us and we don't need the phone? I just can't really think of a piece of hardware that isn't a wearable that's not a phone. But I guess it's up to them to figure that out.
I mean, you have to imagine the long-term ambition is to replace the phone. I don't know that they're going to try to do that right away. But I think it also speaks to this very odd place that, OpenAI and Gen AI in general are sort of in, where it's obviously incredibly popular and many people use them. But at the same time, for a bunch of reasons, largely just because of how much money they've raised and what the expectations are, they still have to grow such a crazy amount, So it's it's weird to talk about it as if it's not this widely adopted technology already, because it totally is. And yet I think there's tremendous pressure on them to be an order of magnitude more popular than they already are, which I think is part of what, again, is to say, okay, what if it's not just, a chatbot on your phone or on your laptop, but something that you wear with you? And it's just about trying to increase that footprint even more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's worth backing up a little bit here. And, everyone, I think most people know, certainly our audience knows who Jony Ive is, which is the famed Apple designer. And he also has a company called Loveform, very human-centric design oriented.
Lovefrom,
and
I think.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Lovefrom. But he also had there's this IO company, which was founded about 2 years ago. And I guess it's about a team of about 55 engineers, scientists, product designers, a lot of ex-Apple folks. And OpenAI already owned 23% of IO. So this is something that they've been thinking about. I mean, yes, the announcement just happened, but hardware and how it combines with AI has been obviously something that's on their mind. And Jony Ive is very much known as, like I said before, a human-centric designer. So really this deal is all equity deal, just acquiring the whole thing. And now it's really them coming together and telling the world, hey, we've been working on this and this is very intentional and expect something sooner rather than later.
Right. And it's also, like you said, the OpenAI was already, presumably an investor in a major investor in IO. And so this is kind of them kind of going all in on this. I mean, we really think this is, if not the future, at least a major component of our strategy going forward. I will say that this seems like a tangent, but I think actually is part of what's happening here, which is all of the messaging is about Sam Altman and Jony Ive. And I think that it's interesting to think about, that Jony Ive obviously has this huge reputation on his own, but really when people think about him, I think you think about him in the context of the design genius who kind of enabled Steve Jobs and sort of like, the Jobs has sort of the big picture idea, and then Ive and his team turned it into these incredibly beautiful, iconic products. And so when, I think a lot of people were making fun of these photos of Altman and Ive being super buddy-buddy in a way that maybe didn't seem the most natural, or maybe seemed too natural. I don't know, you tell me. But I think that probably the thinking there was, again, about framing Altman as this Steve Jobs-esque visionary, and then Jony Ive is the guy who's going to like turn that into beautiful products.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why earlier I said biggest deal in terms of deal size, but also memes, is because the picture specifically has already taken off. And I'm sure most folks have seen it, but it supports the point you just made, which is it's actually kind of like a very personal, sort of intimate feeling photo, which is what I think is throwing a lot of people off because this is a business deal. But to your point, Jony Ive and Steve Jobs were this sort of team, and the success of Apple and Apple products, specifically the iPhone and the iPod and things like this, like really were about those two. And it felt like a recreation of that, relationship. We'll see what it produces, but that certainly seems, at least with that photo, was trying to communicate with the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, who knows, right? Like maybe it'll be something where when at the next OpenAI event, like Jony Ive is going to be on stage, or if he's not on stage, there's going to be these beautiful product videos with like he narrates with that like very recognizable voice of his. But like, I think because again, we just don't think of these two guys together. There's also a bit of an age difference where, Ive is kind of like closer to like, Steve Jobs' age, I think like, in his late 50s, I want to say. And Sam Altman is, about my age, so like about 40-ish. So there's like more than a decade in between, which is not like the lot. It doesn't feel natural, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
It had a fatherly vibe to it, and that's what I mean. It was like felt very personal. I do want to mention one other thing, which Maxwell's not on this show for the whole show. We're going to talk to him later, but he's been talking to folks, at OpenAI and in the industry. And there is sometimes a little bit of a sense, specifically around this deal, that maybe OpenAI is trying to take on too much, and whether this is the right thing to be focused on. But, you have to make money somehow with AI. And I think a lot of companies, how we opened the show with the Google Glass 2.0, there is a sense that you have to have some hardware that goes along with this AI, especially if you're going to have AI agents that consumers interact with all the time.
Yeah, I think there is a sense that this could be the thing that, kind of gets OpenAI towards profitability, kind of expands the customer footprint. It could be also, a huge distraction and part of what causes OpenAI to ultimately not succeed, which is like a crazy thing to say about a company that's already so big and so successful. But again, because I just think the stakes are so high, I think there is still like a chance that OpenAI, not necessarily that it goes away, but certainly like is not as successful as the investors are hoping, and is not necessarily the colossus that it is right now in a few years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've brought up Maxwell's name several times already. So after the break, we're actually going to hear from him. He's been sort of boots on the ground at Google I/O, and we're going to hear all about his insights, who he's talked to, and some of the biggest announcements from that event.
In the business of private capital, managing professional relationships can make or break deals, which is why Affinity's relationship intelligence platform automatically analyzes your team's network of connections across all communications channels. Affinity is used globally by over 3,000 firms and is the most trusted customer relationship management system for private capital. Their new AI-powered tool, Deal Assist, enables teams to converse directly with their Affinity CRM data to uncover new insights, which means less time entering data and more time doing what we want to be doing, finding and closing deals. See how Affinity can streamline your deal-making process at affinity.co.
We are back from the break. I actually am recording this separately with Max because he's been in Silicon Valley, specifically around Google I/O. And so we are borrowing him for just a little bit to dig deep into what actually happened this week. And here's my impressions, Max. I'm wondering if you have the same, which is it was heavily, heavily weighted towards AI. It felt like a lot of like incremental improvements, a lot of proving to the world that, hey, we're here, we're in the mix, we're competitive. And then there were a couple of standouts, but that was kind of my general vibe. What was it like there?
Yes. And hello, everyone. Yeah, at one point during the Google I/O keynote, Sundar Pichai put up a counter for how many words were said, how many times. And the number one most said words were AI and Gemini. They were said about 90 times during the keynote. And then the third most said word was excitement. So I think that should give you a pretty good idea of just what the whole thing was about. They're really excited about AI, but not as much as they are about saying the word AI. I do want to kind of highlight the two big things that happened at Google I/O from my perspective. There were so many announcements. It was easy to get lost in all of it. But I think the really big things that people should pay attention to were the ways AI is making it into Google search and the smart glasses that Google is making.
Yeah, so let's back up to the AI and Google search. There have been a lot of complaints about Google search over the past year or so, or maybe even longer. So what is it that they actually announced here that is relevant to Google search? Is this just semantics to say, hey, we're improving it, or are there real things happening here?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the first event I've seen in a while where Google has really put their money where their mouth is on this AI agent kind of paradigm that they've been talking about. So they're rolling out something called AI mode in Google search, which if our listeners are familiar with Perplexity, it's very similar to Perplexity, where people can just press a button and chat with an AI chatbot in Google search. They're also, as part of AI mode, they have something called Project Mariner, which is an AI agent that can browse the web for you. And it can go to all these websites and take actions for you. It can get tickets for you. It can get you online groceries and whatnot just by chatting with an agent. There's also Project Astra, which we've seen demos of, this kind of multimodal real-time AI agent that you can chat with and it can see what you see. That's making its way into Google search. It's kind of replacing their like reverse image search feature in a much more engaging way. And then there's a lot of other agents that they kind of talked about that are going to kind of come down the funnel and end up in Google search in the next year or two. But this is a real shift. There are AI agents that are going to connect Google users to the web now instead of just Google search, presenting them a list of 10 blue links. And it's a lot different from just the AI overviews.
Okay, so yeah, that was going to be my question. So anyone who uses Google now, you oftentimes see you type in something or you say something and you get that AI overview on the top, and then below it might be the answer to your question, or it might be in the AI overview. Is that going to go away? Did you get a sense that that's going to go away?
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, no. I mean, the Google had no indication that, AI overviews were going away. They actually said that 1.5 billion people a month receive AI overviews, which has led them to call it like the most used generative AI product in the world. And to some extent, that's true. But I would argue, when I use Google search, I don't really have a choice for whether I use AI overviews. They just kind of happen to me. And then, sometimes they say ridiculous things. I would say that AI overviews will probably be here for a while, but this kind of vision of AI agents kind of bringing you the web that Google talked about during this I/O, I found it to be a much more compelling kind of argument for how AI would really change search. I think AI overviews feels very clumsy. I think from the launch, it had a lot of stumbles. It didn't feel like quite the better experience that you were hoping for with AI. But I think these kind of agents that go out on the web and do tasks for you and present information in these kind of unique ways, I think that is actually a much more compelling vision for how AI is going to change all this. But it has a lot of implications for the web.
Yeah, well, and also I'm just wondering, as you were listing off like all the different names, right? Project Mariner, Project Astra, like how many AI agents do we need? And is this just like the evolutionary step, meaning it starts with a bunch of different AI agents that sort of do different things because they aren't good at doing everything yet. So they have the one that gets you the tickets, and then there's the one that gives you the restaurant, reservations, the concierge. But eventually, do you see these all kind of coming together?
I absolutely do. I think that these are kind of headed to be one kind of, AI thing. And Google actually talked about that, this idea called agent mode, which they don't have yet. They said it's going to be rolling out soon to a select number of subscribers to their $200 a month, $250 a month plan, I should say, which they launched. Just a ridiculous amount of money to pay for.
Yeah, that's so much money. I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like, what is $250? Sorry, I don't want to go like too far afield, but like that just seems like a lot. But please finish your point.
That's too much. It is. But basically, the idea is agent mode will roll out to everyone eventually. And agent mode is kind of all of these things in one experience where you don't need to kind of select the right agent or the right model. And you can just basically use Google's agent mode, so to speak. And it will kind of bring you all these things in various mediums. And I do think that is, compared to AI overviews, I think that this is a much better idea.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on, what was the reception for this piece when you were there? You were at the event. You were actually there for a couple of days. So what was the sense from developers and, not the Google execs? I'm sure that they were all very excited about it, but other people on the ground. Was this a step change like you reflected on, or were people more cynical about it?
I think that people were, excited about Google making these changes to Google search. I think that there's been a perception that Google search is going to be disrupted by ChatGPT and AI. And I think every developer I talked to has said for a while that Google really needs to, change with the times and put their money where their mouth is. This is what they did during this IO, I think. I think they shipped these AI experiences right in the core product. I mean, you go to Google search now in the US and there is this AI mode thing, you can't escape it. So they are trying to, evolve their product, which they haven't really done for the last 20 years. So I do think that the reception from developers was Google has woken up. They were asleep at the wheel for a while, but they're back.
Well, speaking of something that is back, Google Glasses.
Brilliant.
So we did kick off the show, kind of chatting about it a little bit, but I wanted to get your perspective because I'm so old that I remember when Google Glasses was here, but they showed off something different yet the same, and a lot of similarities between the two. This is the Android XR prototype. What was the impression on the ground, and how is this different from what we saw, a decade ago with Google Glasses?
Yeah, I mean, this is very similar to Google Glass conceptually. So I think Google does need to be made fun of a little bit for it. But this is different from Google Glass, largely because of generative AI. I mean, honestly, a lot of the features that you could do with Google Glass, Google Glass had your Gmail, like it could show you directions, it could play music and whatever. This is that basically. But generative AI is supposed to just make it work a lot better. I would say Google's approach to this is also very different. Instead of kind of building Google Glass all themselves, they're partnering with Samsung and XReal on some of the kind of the hardware parts of it. They're also partnering with Warby Parker and Gentle Monsters, which is a little bit of a lesser known but very creative kind of eyewear company. And I think that the idea here is that Google is just going to make the Android platform. They are just going to make the AI part of this. And they're going to let an array of partners who are very good at this other stuff figure out the rest of these smart glasses. And honestly, that is such a better idea than what happened with Google Glass. But the reception was great. I mean, people were really excited about this. There was a 2.5-hour wait to try these out at Google I/O for literally days. So this, I think, was definitely one of the hottest kind of releases. And especially in light of OpenAI's announcement that they're working on an AI device. I think there's so much more pressure on all these companies to create a device that will kind of push them into this next generation.
Yeah, hardware is definitely starting to now pop its little head up because there has been enough, let's say, evolution or improvements on the AI side of things. Before you leave us, anything else jump out to you at the event? I saw the VO3, that seemed pretty interesting. There was a few others. I'm talking about that image to video tool. That seemed pretty interesting. But anything else that you left the event thinking, that was different?
what I really left this event feeling was like Google was the VO3 stuff is incredible. I mean, the kind of AI video stuff it's wild, but it also just kind of seems like still we're a little bit far from that. I think the thing that really struck me was just how much Google is trying to become like OpenAI right now. Like Google is trying to do everything it can to compete with this startup. And I think they understand that they are on the clock if they can't figure all this stuff out. I mean, Sundar Pichai almost felt like he was less of an important speaker at this event than Demis Hassabis, DeepMind CEO. And then, Sergey Brin is back and all he works on is Gemini. I mean, this is just like, I think it was completely about AI. We didn't hear anything about Google Assistant. We didn't hear anything about Android. We didn't hear anything even about how Google search is getting better outside of AI. I mean, this is the whole ball game now. And I think that was really kind of stark at this event.
Well, thank you for going there and bringing this all to us, and all of your many stories, by the way, too. Max is going to leave us and we're going to go back to the other normal show, but we will see you for a full show next week, right?
Yep, I'll be back.
Well, the Google I/O stuff was super interesting, but I have some very dramatic stuff to talk to you about, Anthony, now that you're back. It's about Luminar. I don't know if you remembered this company, but it was a very buzzy LiDAR startup, and it went through the typical SPAC cycle circa 2021. It had raised probably around $250 million prior to going public via SPAC. They had some wins with companies like Volvo, but suddenly everything is kind of falling apart. Really kind of the past year, but this past 2 weeks has been crazy. Luminar's board appears to have replaced its CEO and founder, Austin Russell. Then a bunch of layoffs. It's third, as far as I can tell, third layoffs that have happened in the year. And then suddenly locking up with Yorkville Advisors Global to potentially raise up to $200 million. So I don't know if you've been following this, but I assume you have at least some questions for me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think Luminar was one of those companies that I do remember reading about in the past, but, haven't thought about them in many years. And I guess one of the things I'm always wondering in situations like this is that often, right, the way it can look if you follow the headlines, it can be like, things are great, 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 great. And then suddenly it's all falling apart. Like, I have to imagine that there were probably some problems that were happening under the surface that maybe we didn't know about until now.
Well, this is the problem, I think, in general with, not to like disparage like the tech press or startups or anything like that, but I think that there's a lot of curiosity and interest when something is new or has the potential to take off because of interest in a certain sector. So we see that happening with AI now. We saw that in 2017 with the autonomous vehicle industry, and Luminar came around, actually had existed a few years prior to that. But Austin Russell was a Thiel fellow. He had dropped out of Stanford. He had started this company. He was like known as this sort of tech phenom who was very interested, set up a lab in his garage as a kid. It's a very interesting story. And then he launched the company publicly, at least in 2017, right at the peak of AV industry hype cycle. So there was all this interest in, oh my gosh, LiDAR is seen as the sensor that is required for AVs. And this kid is this, super smart guy. And like, there was all these stories around him. He was on the cover of Forbes magazine. We've seen this type of thing happen with numerous other people. Then the company had to face the realities of the hard problems, which is taking hard tech, deep tech, without any contracts, without any production, and like getting scale, testing, getting scale, locking in customers, all the things that are actually really difficult to do. And in an economic environment that changed. The bottom dropped out with the AV industry. Hype cycle went through its, a valley of disillusionment. And here we are. So they've had some struggles in the background for sure. I think almost every LiDAR company I know has. And that's when you see sort of the tech press and also investors kind of peel away. They're not so interested in that the hard stuff, the hard, boring stuff.
Right. And I think also like when you become when you're a company that's been around for a while, you're doing hard tech, you probably got a huge team, is like, you can't just get a friendly investor to write you a check for a few $1 million and that's enough to kind of like keep the lights on. Like you need significant capital. I think just hearing that story and hearing about that cycle with AV, with LiDAR, I mean, obviously at the same time, there's also this whole like VC cycle where suddenly like it just became way harder to raise VC money for anything that wasn't AI, is like, it's like a reminder of like how many kind of visions of the future we've seen as reporters who've been around for years, like, and like how many of them don't necessarily work out. And that doesn't mean that we should always just dismiss them, but like there's always somebody who's trying to convince you like this is inevitable, this is going to be the thing. And then a lot of the times it doesn't happen. And then we kind of forget about that. And obviously I'm like bringing that up partly because I'm like thinking about AI, and I just feel like there's this narrative that Gen AI is so inevitable. Google Glass 2.0 is going to be the inevitable manifestation, or OpenAI, like wearables, is going to be an inevitable manifestation. And I'm not totally convinced yet.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think that one of the reasons why we talked about having Luminar as a theme is because it acts as a metaphor of what we've seen cyclically happening in tech. Specifically for this company, it'll be really interesting to see how they get out of this. And quite honestly, there are so many questions around what is going on with the board's relationship with Austin Russell, who, like I said, was replaced. We don't know if it was, like a board coup and an ousting. There is one mention that it is related to an ethics inquiry, but we have zero details on that. So this seems like a company, unfortunately, that is grappling with capital issues, but also a lot of internal drama. So even if they have a great product, and even if they had great timing, what could upend them is this other side stuff. And that's another classic example of, we've seen this before in the tech world.
Yeah.
On that note, though, I think we were all out of time, but Equity will be back next week with all three of us together again. Until then, you can find Equity under the handle @EquityPod on X and Threads.
Equity is produced by Theresa Loconsolo with editing by Kell. We'd also like to thank TechCrunch's audience development team. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.